So I think what I'm saying is I've tried to strike like a middle balance where, and now we're going to get real deep here. I'm a Zen Buddhist, and I feel that things arise and then and so it's like, I'm going to do this. And like I said, I try to do it all the way. I really do. I mean, and I'm most FBI agents are in it all the way. All of the organizations I've been a part of have been places where there's no halfway. It's all the way or nothing, right? So you can't be a halfway Marine Corps infantry officer. You can't be a halfway FBI agent. I mean, some people try, but you really can't.
You're not going to be successful.
You really can't be. And so it's go full tilt, do it, have the experience, give everything you got, get everything you can get out of it. And then at some point you reach that point where you go, okay, did that, got it, understood. What else interests me in the world? Because there's infinite possibilities out there for people, right? So, you do it all the way. And then when the conditions arise that chapter's over, what else is speaking to you at that point? So that's kind of what's happened with me over my whole career, right?
Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm joined this time by Michael Panico. Michael embodies the mentality of take life's opportunities as they come. And I say that in the most positive way. His life journey is almost easier to read just as a series of bullet points. He was a lifelong wrestler. He knew he wanted to go to college. Got the opportunity to go to Harvard on an ROTC scholarship. He had seen the movie, this little low-budget indie film, Top Gun, while he was in high school and decided he wanted to fly for the Navy. When he got there, though, he met what he describes as his people and opted for the Marine Corps. He had no plans to make the Marine Corps a career. He did his 4 years as an infantry leader and got out. As he was coming close to his EAS, it was recommended to him to look into the FBI. No prior aspirations for law enforcement, no family in law enforcement. He simply applied and was accepted. He excelled, spent 10 years there, rose to the rank of supervisory agent, and stumbled into cybercrime. That opened up new doors for him. The first company to come calling was Microsoft. And then from there, a startup company, several motion picture and TV production companies. And today, he's the chief information security officer of a health insurance company. Oh, and one of the stops in between there was he was the technical advisor on the movie Blackhat. It was fun to sit and talk with Mike and learn and get into his journey. I know you're going to enjoy this conversation as much as I did. So let's get into it. Here's episode 127 with Michael Panico. You've got quite a few iterations in your professional career,
and
I want to
take us a while,
and that's okay. What I like to do is take my listeners through the guest's whole life. Okay. So I'm going to take you all the way back to the beginning. Talk to me about where's hometown. Where were you raised?
I was raised in northern New Jersey in Bergen County. Suburb of
Born and
New York
raised?
City. Yeah, born and raised. Went to a public high school there.
All right, is your family generational from that area, from the Jersey area?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Italian American. Great grandparents came over.
What about family size? Were you brothers, sisters?
Small. Mom, dad, sister. That's it. Just pretty small family.
What did mom and dad do for work?
They were teachers.
Okay.
Yeah.
At the high school level, elementary?
High school teachers. And my dad eventually was a high school principal at a local, not my high school, but at a local high school in the same county.
That's where I was going to go with it. Did you ever end up having to have your parents as one of your teachers?
No, thankfully.
So you escaped that one?
But I did, I wrestled in high school, and I did wrestle against my dad's team at one point.
So your dad was the wrestling coach also?
No, he was the principal.
For that
I wrestled
school.
against and I'd wrestled guys from his school before,
What brought you to wrestling?
I always won. I'm 5'5", and 150 today. I check this morning.
Holding a 10-pound weight.
I was always, a little smaller. I loved football when I was a kid. I played junior football, but I rapidly got, everybody kind of outgrew me, and I was competitive, and I wanted to do something. And wrestling seemed like the natural fit because I was like 101 pounds my freshman year of high school. And so I was a 4-year varsity letterman. I really took to it. I loved it. I loved the sport. I mean, I see that you're wearing a jiu-jitsu. Like it's, there's some similarities there. Obviously you get it. It's like a one-on-one kind of, is a very competitive thing. I'm from in New Jersey. It's a pretty serious thing. There's all the high schools that have a wrestling team. It's very competitive. People train. I trained all year long. So, me and several of my teammates we'd take the summers and go drive around Pennsylvania and go to tournaments in Pennsylvania where they have really good wrestling too, and just really train hard.
Did you start when you were in high school, or did you start before high school?
I started before. I started when I was in third grade. Yeah,
okay. So you grew up wrestling.
Wrestling, yeah, my many years. Yeah, up through my freshman year in college, basically, I wrestled. For you, was it ever a struggle or an issue making weight or cutting weight, or were you able to kind of slide right through? Nah, it's always, I think everybody, it's always an issue because you're always trying to go lower, right? Because then you, theoretically, right, the competition should be easier because it's a kind of a great, it's a bit of an arms race, right? You go down, then the guy goes down, the guy you're trying to avoid goes down there. And so, everyone's trying to get down to as low as they can. So even when I was, my freshman year, I didn't cut too much weight, but by the time I was a senior, I think I was like about 135 and I was wrestling at 115. So, I'd go down.
And you and I are the same age, so we're talking the mid 80s when you were in high school.
That's right.
Was there a science to cutting weight, or was it,
completely, no, not at all. You did the dieting things, but what it really came down to losing water weight. You just sweat it all out and you would get dehydrated basically, which is, it's really
counterintuitive to being performance ready.
It's really pretty awful. And I don't, want to get into a whole moralistic conversation about that. I'm pretty removed from wrestling these days, but it's not great. It's not really great for growing young men and women.
I think women are doing it.
Yeah,
now.
Young men and women to be doing that to their bodies. The theory is you get dehydrated, right? You get on the scale, you get off the scale, you drink some fluids, and then you're basically back in business, and you're 130 again, and you're wrestling 115. Of course, the person you're wrestling is also the same. So you're, at match time weight is probably not. It's definitely not what you weighed in at, right? So it's a little bit of a silly apparatus, but
almost like the holdover from the old days or the old times. It's something that it's 2024 and kids are still doing it today. It's hard
to get away from it for whatever reason because it's your choice. I can always say I'm going to wrestle at a weight class below this year. It's, especially people who are trying to make the team, if they want to make their high school varsity team, and there's a guy who's better than them at the weight that they're at, they'll go down. It's harder to go up. Paradoxically, right? You could always go up and wrestle higher, but then you're going to be wrestling someone who's coming down to 150 or whatever, and you're going up from 140.
Right.
That guy, when at match time, is going to be 165, 170 pounds, is going to be a lot bigger than you. And so, and you'll feel it, right? Yes. In the match, it will matter. So, anyway.
How were you as a student?
I was a good student. I was valedictorian of my high school. So those two things in combination helped to, get me into the college that I got into. So I was fortunate enough to go to Harvard. I had good scores, and I had the wrestling coach at Harvard, I think, helped me somewhat. They don't give scholarships at Ivy League schools for those sorts of things, but it certainly mattered. And, I was a good student and I had the scores and everything. So I was able to go there.
Was Harvard where you wanted to go, or was it something that just kind of organically happened?
That is such a great question. My parents being teachers, we obviously knew what Harvard was and what it meant to go there. And, I was encouraged to apply because I had the grades and the scores. and I had the extracurricular activities, and I was the captain of the wrestling team, and I'd been pretty successful at wrestling.
Plus that little V, valedictorian doesn't hurt either. Yeah.
So, there was like, oh, hey, you've got a shot, and why wouldn't you try? What's interesting is, and this is, it sort of all comes together because I also had this interest in being a military officer. And so it was basically down to the U.S. Naval Academy and Harvard. And I ultimately decided to do an ROTC at Harvard because it basically came down to, you can't say no. You get accepted at Harvard, you should probably go, right? Like,
well, there aren't many kids who have to make that decision between the Annapolis and Harvard, so it's definitely not one I would imagine you just do it in a coin flip.
No, a lot of thought went into it, but I would say that's not to say that it's the right choice for everyone. And to be honest with you, sometimes I wonder if it was even the right choice for me because it's a big school and there's a lot going on there, and there's a lot of amazing people that go to that school, and that's probably the best part of it is you just get to meet these people who are already the best in the world at something, like the world's best cello player or the world's best jazz pianist or the world's, I can't even think of half the things, but you just meet these people that are just amazing. And it's a little bit of an adjustment. I'm, a public school kid from New Jersey, and I go to this place with all these people, and I'm just pretty, taken aback by it. It took me a little while to adjust to that. So it may not be so even though I said you really shouldn't say no, and I don't ultimately regret the choice. I mean, it still has probably more positive attributes than negative attributes, but it's not the right thing for everybody. Some people are better with a smaller school, or they have more personal attention, or have the ability to stretch their wings a little bit and be seen. At Harvard, if you're not the world-class cellist or the guy who's about to get a Nobel Prize in chemistry, you're just a guy.
You're just somebody walking
around. Yeah. So, and that's an adjustment for a lot of people who go to school there, where you go, it's the big fish, small pond, small fish, big pond thing in spades there. So, having said that, I still really enjoyed the experience. Like I said, I'm mostly the people that I met and just like really amazing, brilliant people, who do really incredible things, and a lot of the people you hear about in the press are the people who are successful financially, but there are a lot of really impactful people. Maybe that's the right way to say it. There's a lot of people who come out of Harvard and do a lot of very impactful things in society that are not just about being financially successful, like they do a lot of really impactful things.
And I know that's a big conversation today as far as kids going off to college, but in your time at Harvard and going back now 30 plus years, did you find that overall you were encouraged to be a free thinker and to kind of follow your own path, or were you kind of more follow the Harvard path?
Do you mean like from my parents?
From the school?
From the school? In fact, I think that's one of the things that is one of those things that cuts both ways at Harvard. It is very much a free thinker place, and you are expected to be pretty self-directed. So you can get lost at Harvard if you don't have kind of a North Star. I want to do this, I want to be this, and have some kind of a mentor to help you through it. And that is one of their, you and I were talking a little bit before we started here about sort of support group and mentorship and things like that. And it's one of the things that I would say, and it may be different now, but in 1987 when I went, I felt that I was on my own, and I had made there's good and bad of that. You got to grow up, make your own choices, figure out what you want, do it. That's great. But if you don't have that, my parents were fantastic in terms of educating me and making me exposed to things culturally. I mean, we used to spend a lot of time in the city, museums, shows. So I was very culturally, exposed to cultural things. But that was way outside either of their experience. Right. So trying to deal with some of the challenges that came from going to a school like Harvard were things that are kind of outside of their wheelhouse, if you would, if so to speak, so.
At that time, so the little bit that I know about wrestling, the Midwest is kind of the hotbed, Iowa, Missouri, or those areas. Yeah. Pennsylvania. What was the Ivy League's reputation at that time for wrestling?
Not well known. There's some good wrestlers. In fact, following me in the couple of decades after I left, Harvard had a very good wrestling team. And they heavily recruited from New Jersey and had a couple of guys who were Jersey State champions who went and made the program pretty successful. So, but when I was there, it was just kind of, I don't think it had any, I can't recall that we had anybody who was like nationally recognized, but I believe that in the time since then, they've had a few people in the Ivy League who've gone on to do well nationally. I don't know all the details, but
were you able to wrestle all 4 years?
No, I just wrestled my first year. I went 500, which I wrestled varsity my freshman year. But I just basically, it just got to be too much, to be honest. I was doing an ROTC, so I had switched over to Marine ROTC very early on, and there was a pretty significant time requirement for that. We'd get up in the morning and go PT, physical train. And our unit was at MIT, and so I had to go down. It's only 3 or 4 miles from Harvard down in Cambridge, but I had to go over there, and just honestly, and I was just kind of burned out, and I'd been wrestling since I was 10 or something like that, and I just kind of and then obviously it was a much more rigorous academic schedule in high school. I could kind of concentrate on wrestling and just phone it in on the homework and still do well. But, it was a whole different thing where you're taking organic chemistry at Harvard and trying to, spending 3-4 hours at night at practice and then having to study after you're all beaten up and tired. So, having said that, plenty of people do it. I just didn't feel that I could do it. So
now you mentioned that you considered Annapolis. So when did the military start coming into your purview?
That's a good question. So I think, my dad had always been,
Did your dad serve?
He did not serve. But he was a big supporter. And, I recall that we would always go to, if there was a naval ship that came into New York, or whenever we got, of course, we're not far from West Point there. We used to go to West Point football games. My best friend from high school was the co-captain of the wrestling team, went to West Point. There was just, I also think, Paul, around that time in the mid 80s, sort of Reagan years, there was a lot more there was a kind of a spirit of that, a little bit more of the, the military had kind of bounced back from Vietnam and was looked on a little bit more favorably by society again. And so there was a little bit of a societal thing there. My dad, I think, we went to the Naval Academy when we were going through Maryland. And I just thought it was the greatest thing. I don't know what appealed to me about it. I think it's interesting. The things are related. Wrestling is a very regimented, a lot of discipline involved, no whining, no crying, just, that kind of thing. And seeing the discipline in the Naval Academy, it just appealed to me. And so I always, from, a young age, probably junior high or whatever, I thought, this seems like the kind of thing that I would like to do. So that's pretty much,
So initially you were headed towards the Navy. What were you hoping or thinking you wanted to do in the Navy?
Well, that's the other thing. Another really important moment. I don't know the exact year, but I think 1985 was when Top Gun came out.
Okay.
So I'm not ashamed.
I think it's 87.
Maybe 86. Maybe 86. It's so I'm not ashamed to admit it. That impacted me pretty heavily. I saw that, and then that was
you were the only one that got impacted by that movie.
That was the greatest recruiting film probably of all time because I thought, I want to fly planes. I want to be Maverick, right?
I think that movie could be a recruiting film today.
It still is, right? And so all those things were happening. You had the Reagan years. I had already been exposed to it. I had already gone to the Naval Academy. I saw that film. I was like, I want to fly. I want to be a naval aviator. And that's what I wanted to do. And then I thought, but I'm going to go to Harvard. I'm going to get this great education. I'm going to be a naval aviator because you can't do that forever. And then I'll have, when I'm done, I'll be able to do something else. So, best laid plans that changed.
What caused the switch? What caused... was it Navy fighter pilot? Okay, I can or cannot do fighter pilot. I'm going to find something else in the Navy, or went immediately to the Marine Corps?
I went to my first sort of orientation. There's a pre-school year orientation for ROTC, and they sent us out to a place in Massachusetts. Fort Devens. I don't know. I can't remember the name of it, but we went out to this place to do this like pre-orientation where the ROTC staff had all of the new midshipmen coming in, and I just knew immediately that the Marines were my people. I just knew it. Again, I think the wrestling, the that's not to make light of anybody who's in the Navy. Obviously, everybody's a dedicated professional, but just the Marines seem to be my tribe. Yeah.
As a kid growing up, did you have much exposure to any? I know you said you went and saw ships when they were coming in, but did you have any family or friends that were military?
No, not at all. So it's just sort of, I knew I wanted to do it, and then I got in, and it was interesting. My class at Harvard had 10 what was called Marine Option, Navy ROTC Marine Option, 10 Marine Option candidates who eventually became second lieutenants. And, in 91 we graduated and spread all out. And, we had guys they did everything. We had artillery guys and recon Marines and all kinds of stuff. Yeah. So it was an interesting moment. I mean, I think it was kind of the crest of that wave, if you will, where it was like the Reagan years, this sort of I don't want to say renewed patriotism, but there was kind of this like patriotism in the country and the Top Gun thing. And so the classes in ROTC were pretty full. And, and then I met this group of what I would call a cadre of guys who were Marine Option. I was like, these are the guys, and I want to do this. And I thought I would still fly because as you know, Marines have aviators as well. And so I thought, maybe I'll still fly. But then that changed too once I got into basic training.
What'd you end up doing once you got there?
I was an infantry officer. So this is, I would say thematically, one of the things in my life has always been you do the best, you do the hardest thing. You pick the hardest thing. Like you do the thing. You don't do it halfway, do it all the way, right? So it was like, well, the Marines are the thing. And then in the Marines, the thing is infantry officer. That's, it's
every man's a rifleman.
It's the most dangerous thing, but it's the thing. Like, and I had my staff platoon commander at the basic school. So you go to the basic school in Quantico, Virginia. Spent a lot of time in Quantico, Virginia. Was also not a huge guy who's probably like 5'6". He wasn't much taller than me. He was built like a brick house. And he kind of took shine to me, not overtly. He wasn't playing favorites, but I think he sort of was watching me the whole time. And I remember going in when we were going to choose your MOS, your military occupational specialty, right? And I went in and I said, yeah, I think tanks, because I wanted to ride. I didn't want to walk. And he was like, you sure about that? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, you want to be in a tank? I was like, do I not want to be in a tank? And he was like, you don't want to be an infantry officer? And I was like, I get it.
I'm reading what you're...
And I get it. And I was like, yeah. Okay. That sounds like I didn't have the agency there, but it just spoke to me, right? Because again, the theme is what's the hardest thing? Like I shouldn't be an infantry officer. I'm too small to be an infantry officer, but I'm going to do it anyway. So that's kind of what happened.
Going in, were you thinking career?
No, I think I knew, and this is interesting because I think having gone to Harvard, I was really exposed to like what the whole broad world has to offer. And I thought there's so many things to do with your life. And I really want to do this and I'm all in, but I can't see myself doing this in, 20 years from now. Like it's definitely a young man's game, right? Being a Marine Corps infantry officer. And also that's a pretty narrow pyramid, right? That narrows pretty quickly. So yeah.
Where was your first duty station?
Hawaii, Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii, Marine Corps Air Station. So I was in 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines.
When you were actually fully in it, what was that experience like for you? Did it something you fell right into pretty easily from the rigors of being a wrestler, or did you find that you didn't really, it's like, maybe this really isn't for me?
No, I can tell you that I'm glad you asked the question that way, because I would tell you that being a wrestler and that, we talked about, you lose the weight, I've really done some tough things, before I got out of high school. Like wrestling is a whole different thing. It's a whole different thing, right? And just the amount of sacrifice and discipline and courage and all the stuff. I remember going to officer candidate school, right? Which it's different when you're in ROTC. They call it Bulldog. It's basically officer candidate school, and you go between your junior and senior year. And I remember thinking, and they try to wash you out. They try to brutalize you. And I remember thinking, like, I'm not saying it was easy, but I just remember thinking, like, I've been through worse. That's what I keep reminding myself. I've been through worse than this. I have been through worse than this.
I've got wrestling coaches.
Yeah, exactly. I've been through worse than this. And then I always used to say to myself, like, yeah, and at the end of the day, I get to eat. Because in wrestling, we do all this, and then I'd have to go home and suck on an ice cube and try to go to sleep and not be able to sleep because you're dehydrated. So this is a whole different ballgame. I get to eat and then go to sleep, right? Even for 4 hours or whatever it is, I still get to sleep, right? So to your point, like that carried over in the Fleet Marine Force. I was obviously, it's a pretty intimidating thing. You get command over 39, 40 Marines as a platoon commander, and it's a lot of responsibility. And so that part is pretty daunting, but I never thought I couldn't do it, right? I never thought I couldn't do it. And they train us well, right? I mean, they absolutely train the shit out of us, right? Well, I'd swear. The other thing I meant to mention is, so after the basic school, 6 months, that's 6 months at Quantico, and then there's another 3 months in infantry officers course. And I have to tell you that, we just talked about the fact that I went to Harvard University, which is probably one of the best, if not the best school in the whole world. And my favorite school that I went to was the infantry officer course. It was so great. It was really hard, very taxing, but they weren't trying to wash you out, but they were trying to prepare you. And so I don't think they don't send Marine second lieutenants out to the world and not have them be ready. They're ready. You're ready when you go out there. So, yeah.
Well, when you think about levels of responsibility as far as careers go,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You're a young doctor. You've got, potentially going to be doing some surgeries, but you're talking about, a very young officer in charge of other men and women in combat. Yes. I mean, talk about the level of responsibility that you have to put on your shoulders and be able to operate at.
I won't be able to speak about it as well as others because I was never in combat. But they have to prepare you to be able to do that. Yeah, you still have that in your mind, right, all the time, and you're constantly thinking about how am I going to make sure that these guys, all guys, of course, Marine Corps infantry, especially at the time I went through, are going to survive based on whether I train them well enough or not. And then, that's a huge responsibility, and I loved every minute of it. I loved those guys. I love them like family. I don't keep much in touch, a little bit on Facebook, but I just, what an experience. And so what a great, I think you go from Harvard and you're meeting these people who are, for the most part, pretty privileged people from all walks of life. Then you go and you meet all these guys coming from wherever the heck they're coming from, all across the country, inner cities, rural areas. They're all in together. I mean, it's such, one of the great things about the military is democratization, right? Of the people being together with one another and learning to live with one another and understand each other. And that's a great thing. And I really enjoyed every second of that and seeing what I could get those guys to do, what we could do together. It was great.
Were you just, I'll say, lucky enough to be in between Desert Storm and the Gulf Wars?
Exactly right. I came in, so when we were in infantry officers course, the Gulf War started in, June of 91, I went to the basic school. We were done in December. The air war, I'm getting it wrong. The war kicked off in 90. The air war started in,
I think it was 91 because I remember being in the
I was still a senior in college. Yeah, this is what happened. And I was still a senior in college. And so we were there when the air war kicked off. It was done, right, by the time I got to the basic school.
A cup of coffee didn't even get finished.
Yeah, it was over. But what was interesting is when I got to the fleet, they were just coming back. So all of the guys that were under my command were guys who had been in war. So that was really interesting too. So I'm sure they looked at me like, oh, here's this freaking guy from Harvard butter bar, coming in. And that was a really interesting adjustment too, because they were pretty salty, and they really didn't want to hear much from me. But we eventually got them kind of back into discipline.
And once you were in, there was nothing that kind of maybe was a pivot point for you where you might have considered a career?
No, I don't think so. I think I always knew that I wanted to do something a little more cerebral, honestly, partly, and just try other things. And life is short. There's lots of things things to do, and I just thought there were other opportunities. Like I feel like again, thematically for me, it's like do it all, get it all out of it, everything out of it you can, give everything you can, and then what's the next thing, right?
And we're definitely going to get into this because that's definitely something that has, and I don't mean this in any type of negative way. You've definitely mirrored that through your entire career with all the stops that we'll kind of get into.
Yeah.
So you were scheduled to come out. What year did you come out of the Marine Corps?
So 95. So a 4-year tour for ROTC, right? Obviously, it's a scholarship they pay and you owe 4 years. And which, by the way, also as a note, right? Huge advantage for me, right? My parents were teachers, the ability to go to Harvard on the government's dime, and then also to pay them back was something I wanted to do anyway. That was a great deal for me. So 95, I'm about to get out, and I know we talk about transitions here, right? So I remember very clearly another part of my life that I had no exposure to before was the FBI. And my last billet in the Marine Corps I was at SINCPAC Fleet in Pearl Harbor. It's called a B billet, right? You do the Fleet Marine Force, and then you do like a support type billet. And I worked for a Navy commander there who had been a San Francisco police officer. I can't remember completely, but he had been a police officer at one point and had been a military police, like shore patrol in the Navy. And his job was the security of the naval bases in the Pacific Fleet. And I worked for this commander. But what's interesting is, and for your listeners and maybe for you, if you're familiar with the FBI National Academy, it's a very well-known, it's a great thing that the FBI does. And local law enforcement officers that get a chance to go to the FBI Academy and do the National Academy, they always love it. It's a great experience for them. It's a good thing for the Bureau, right? The Bureau gets this relationship with these local officers all over the place. But this guy had been there. And so what's interesting is that it even paid off for the Bureau in that respect, because you had this guy who was like, many law enforcement officers don't like the FBI, or some don't. But if you'd had that experience, you did. And so he had his very positive outlook on the FBI. And he was like, you should think about the FBI when you get out there. Because he knew I was rolling off in 8 months or whatever. And he was like, you should think about the FBI. Those guys that's a pretty tight outfit over there, and blah, blah, blah.
You think part of it was driven by the fact that you were already in the federal system and you're already in that federal retirement system?
No.
Okay.
It ended up working out well for me in the long run because I had the years, but I don't think that really didn't have much impact. It's interesting, right? As you know, this is I think a good part of the story and very relevant to what this podcast is about is, I went to I forget what they call it. There's some kind of, not a career day, but they do this thing, where you muster out and you do all your paperwork, and then there's like a job fair. I remember pretty clearly being in a gym in Pearl Harbor with this, the tables set up everywhere. And it's like, get your Cobra health insurance and go around and do all your paperwork. And then they had job fair, and there was someone from the FBI there.
Is it kind of like TAPS?
I don't I don't remember. There was a word for it.
It was for those who were getting close to getting out.
Yeah, when you're just about to get out, they start preparing you, and then there was also this junior officer recruiter, and that's something that I think has persisted to this day, where they have these guys who kind of get these specialized in placing junior officers in work, in jobs. And so I met one of those people, and I had talked to him, and I started working with him. I signed up for the FBI, and I just did it. This probably would infuriate a lot of the people out there there are a lot of people who it's their dream to be FBI agents and struggle to get in and can't get in. And I'm sure it will infuriate them to hear this, but I thought, that would be kind of cool, but I'll just throw an application in and see how it goes. And if I don't get it, it won't break my heart. And if I do get it, I'll see what I'm going to do. But I was exploring everything. So the junior officer recruiter, the sign up for the bureau. And then I also I took the LSAT, and I was thinking about maybe graduate school. I thought, do I go back to graduate school? I didn't have a huge interest in going to graduate school at that time. I'm not sure if that was the right. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are lawyers, and I couldn't have been a doctor. I didn't have the grades for that. Lawyers, people who went to business school that have done quite well in their lives and are very happy with those choices, and that probably would have been okay too. But as time went on, every couple of months I get a letter from the bureau saying, can you come in and do the psych test? Can you come in and do the PT? Can you come in and do the whatever it was, written test? And so I do it. And all that time I was being sent out for job interviews by this junior officer recruiter. And, I'd like to relate that.
Just like corporate jobs?
Yeah. Well, no, it was kind of interesting. And maybe I just hooked up with the wrong guy. And I think maybe this is good advice for listeners is, the person that I worked with, I think I didn't totally understand. And what he was sending me out on job interviews for like frontline management in like manufacturing stuff, which, in 1995, I don't know what the state of manufacturing is like now. I mean, I know we still do manufacturing in this country, but it's much more of a knowledge economy now. But at the time, so he would send me out on these interviews, and I remember very clearly the three interviews that I went out on. One of them was at a glass factory, and the job was to be a frontline supervisor, and it was like 8 guys that worked in the factory, and it was like 12-hour shifts, 6 hours a day, and 6 days a week, 12-hour shifts, and the pay wasn't that great.
And where was it located?
It must have been here in Southern California. I don't remember exactly now, but it was definitely in Southern California because I was living here. I forgot to mention that when I left the Marines, I came to Southern California and did not go back to New Jersey because I like the weather here too much. And
again, you're the only person who's ever done that.
Right. And I just was like, this is not, I don't want to do this. This first of all, I've managed way more people than this. This is not there's no challenge here. It just sounds bad, like a lot of time and effort and not great pay. And it's not really the place I wanted to go. And then I think he sent me out on a couple of jobs to be a sales rep for different things. And I was like, sales doesn't speak to me either. And so he and I kind of had a heart to heart. And I was like, I don't think any of the things that you're sending me out are anything I want to do.
Did any other law enforcement agencies come to your radar besides the FBI?
No, I didn't. I hadn't looked at anything. I was just I honestly was working some odd jobs here in California. I was kind of taking a little bit of a time out and just kind of seeing what was going on and messing around. Going
back to you as a kid, do you have any law enforcement in your family or friends?
No, not at all.
So both the military and law enforcement was in essence foreign to you going into them.
Yeah, that's right. So when the Bureau finally came knocking, I basically I had about a year and change. It was like August of 96 or July of 96 because I went to Quantico in August. So it had been about a year.
Month to start the academy.
In Quantico. It had been about a year since I left the Marines, and I had kind of had a little time out in the civilian world and was hanging out, and I can say honestly, it wasn't like I was jumping for joy, like this was a lifelong dream, but I was like, you know what? I didn't like any of the things that seemed to be on offer for me. And this is back to the theme. This is the greatest law enforcement agency in the world. I'll still be serving my country. It speaks to my it speaks to my need to do something relevant and honorable and, service oriented. And so, let's give this a shot for a while. So I thought it might be like,
there's that reoccurring theme for a while.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's really do it up for, X number of years. I mean, I think everything has its sort of life, right? A life to it,
Well, you made a comment previously where you say this is probably going to irritate some people or maybe anger some people because you really didn't have a clear path. But I think for as many that might potentially become angered by it, there's a greater number that are envious, because I think a lot of us, when we're younger, we found that one thing and that's what we're going to do. And then 35, 40 years later, you look back and you go, maybe I had a good run, maybe I had a bad run, whatever. But the attitude that you have, I think a lot more people in the back of their mind wish they could have been. Like, let me just see where life takes me and see where I end up. But unfortunately, we're raised by our parents. Go get a good job. You need a good job. You need secure. And that kind of gets droned into us to where for a lot of us, you're like, I don't want to say I didn't want to do this. It was, I chose something, and by God, my dad raised me. When you choose something, you stick with it.
Yeah. I mean, there's two sides, there's two sides to every, to get super philosophical, but right. I mean, I think it's like anything else. You make a commitment to something. There's value in seeing the commitment through.
But there's also nothing wrong with saying, I've got an exit date and I've got other things that I want to go do in my life.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I've really tried to put out with the podcast is, if your heart changes, if your compass changes while you're in the middle of a career, then make the change. Don't write it out just simply because you signed your name on the dotted line.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what I'm saying is I've tried to strike like a middle balance where, and now we're going to get real deep here. I'm a Zen Buddhist, and I feel that things arise and then so it's like, I'm going to do this. And like I said, I try to do it all the way. I really do. I mean, and I'm most FBI agents are in it all the way. All of the organizations I've been a part of have been places where there's no halfway. It's all the way or nothing, right? So you can't be a halfway Marine Corps infantry officer. You can't be a halfway FBI agent. I mean, some people try, but you really can't.
You're not going to be successful.
You really can't be. And so it's go in, go full tilt, do it, have the experience, give everything you got, get everything you can get out of it. And then at some point you reach that point where you go, okay, did that, got it, understood. What else interests me in the world? Because there's infinite possibilities out there for people, right? So, you do it all the way. And then when the conditions arise that chapter is over, what else is speaking to you at that point? So that's kind of what's happened with me over my whole career, right? It's like, okay, so.
When did you graduate the academy?
When did I graduate? I started in August 96, so it would have been December 96 probably, yeah. And
where was your first office? So the same, back to LA?
Yeah. So
choice?
By choice, yeah. So I liked it here. I had grown fond of it in the year that I lived here. I had a girlfriend and I wanted to come back. And at the time, I heard your podcast with another FBI agent, and he talked about the whole selection process. So I won't go into all that, but basically it was a little different when I went in, which was a few years before I think he went in. If you came out of Los Angeles, you went back to Los Angeles because they were having a hard. If you came out of New York, you went back to New York because they were having a hard time filling those big offices, the big city offices, because the cost of living is high. It's just a harder place to be. I mean, the agents that went to New York are miserable in the first year or so. There's no place to park your car. It just doesn't sound great. Los Angeles, on the other hand, I thought was a great place to be for a first office because it is a big city. There's a lot of stuff going on here. Every different violation is in Los Angeles. So whatever it is that you are working on, you're going to have interesting cases to work on. And Yet it's also, in my opinion, a fairly livable city. So even as a single agent at GS10, I still could afford a decent apartment and still live and have a nice life and have all the lifestyle that we have here, the nice weather, the beach, all that stuff. So I thought, if it's New York or Los Angeles, definitely Los Angeles sounds like the good place to be. So I enjoyed that. I was happy with that. That was great.
Did you have aspirations as far as what you wanted to do as an FBI agent?
Not really. I didn't have any specific goal in mind. And so that's really interesting because when I started, I started out in an applicant squad, which is sometimes they send new agents to that, which is basically just doing background investigations, which I knew I didn't want to do that forever. And they, it's planned that you don't do that forever. They have you there for 6 months, a year or something. And then I ended up being on the healthcare fraud squad. And I think I did choose that. The reason I chose that was in 1997. That was right around the time, I believe, the Healthcare Insurance Portability and Accountability Act was 1997. And I remember also at the time, whoever the president was and whoever the attorney general was, healthcare fraud for whatever reason became like a big thing. And so it was a big thing in the bureau and they were trying to get people to do it. And I was like, all right, I'll do that. Once again, I was like, okay, this is the thing. I'll do that thing. That's where they want people. I'll go do that. And so I did that for like 4 or 5 years after that. About halfway through my FBI career, I did healthcare fraud.
What prompted you or what pushed you over to cyber?
I know your other guest, who's an FBI agent, talked about 9/11. That was obviously a huge moment. Interesting little side note. I was at the FBI Academy in Quantico doing an in-service the day that occurred. And so watched the second plane hit the tower from the student lounge in Quantico with the rest of the agents. Just, I won't be able to talk too much about it because it still hits. But just really like a punch in the gut and just thinking, oh man, and another interesting little side note, I ended up being able to go out to Shanksville. So I actually went to that crime scene because I was also in I was in evidence recovery team. So myself and another agent ended up driving out to Shanksville to bring supplies and help out in Shanksville. So I got to see that crime scene, which again, another gut punch, right? Absolute gut punch. Flight 93, right? So how does that get me to cyber? It disrupted the whole bureau, right?
Let's stay on that for a second. How long did 9/11 keep you on the East Coast?
Wow. Yeah, that was like 6 weeks, right when planes were grounded, because even agents couldn't get anywhere at that time. And I'll remember, I'm going to have to try to tell this story because I always get emotional. As I remember I went back as soon as they started flights up, I got on, I think it was a United flight to come back to LA to get back to the office. And I remember, the flight attendants being freaked out. And of course I'm armed and I'm allowed to be armed on the plane. So they're looking at me and I'm like, we're getting where we're going. Don't worry about it. So that was something, right? So I got back here, and as soon as we got back here, was way into it. And so where this leads to cyber is
well, just a quick side note for those who don't know this and who have never traveled armed on an airplane.
Yeah.
The stewardesses and the pilots know. Yeah. And they are looking at you, regardless of what you're on that plane for. Yeah. If you're flying armed, they know, and they're looking at you. Oh, you're going to handle business, right?
Yeah, especially in this scenario. Like, it was literally one of the first flights out of, and I must have flown out of Dulles or Washington National. So they're on like, oh my God, are we going to? Because remember, even then, like nobody knew if the other shoe was going to drop. We didn't know if there were other cells out there. It's so much different looking back. But you remember for days and weeks, it was like we didn't know what was going to happen next. And so those people were terrified and looking at me like, well, this guy's an FBI agent, right? Like he's going to, they were like breaking down on the plane,
Well, even before you get on the plane though, 9/11 changed things in the United States if you weren't somebody who traveled often before 9/11, you may have not know what it was like, but it was I mean, literally night and day in the level of security.
Oh God, yeah.
You know, because I've said this many times in other episodes. I grew up in the airport. My dad worked for American Airlines my whole time as a kid growing up. So I remember as a kid walking around LAX, just walking around LAX.
Was he impacted by it?
No, he had already passed away by that time.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Actually, he passed away February of that year.
Oh, wow.
But he had already been retired. But he fueled airplanes, and so I got to go to work with him and walk around the airport.
See it,
but even as a kid, we used to just go to the airport, and you would go watch planes take off, and you would sit right at the gate. You weren't a passenger; you just walked in.
Yeah.
And so 9/11 it's not just the flying; it's everything getting to the plane completely changed.
Sure. Yeah. It's a really tough thing, you know, and not to get too philosophical or political in any way, but it's really tough in those times to balance a free society and what you have to do to make sure that we can get around and be secure. So, point well taken.
So back to cyber. How'd you get over to cyber?
So when I got back to LA, we were all working terrorism 24/7, that kind of thing. And then they had put together kind of a super squad of people from all the different other squads. So they had like a couple of healthcare guys, a couple of cyber guys, a couple of gang guys. And they basically I don't know how much I can talk about this, but basically we were getting intelligence information and that super squad would
work it.
And so I got to know the guys from these other squads. And so I had again, all in, always night and day, 100%, 110%. I had got a good reputation of being a good agent who could make cases and get things down. And so the cyber guys were like, hey, we're filling out, the cyber squad's growing, we're filling the cyber squad out. And I was like, I don't know a dang thing about computers. I was just in the Marines. We don't have any computers in the Marines. I came out, I really don't know anything. And they were like, we'll teach you. And I was smart enough to realize, like, yeah, this is the future. This is the thing to know. I should go to those schools, et cetera. And so I said yes. And they brought me over to the cyber squad. And that was great. I was so happy that I did that. I mean, I like the healthcare front squad. I still have very close friends from that squad. But the cyber thing was a whole new world. I mean, it was so cool. It was so interesting to get into this whole new world of stuff that, it's just on another plane. And, it served me well to this day. I mean, we'll get into that obviously, but, making that move was a great decision.
And going back to your normal pattern of practice, the day you stepped on the line to be an FBI agent, did you already have your exit date in mind?
No, I'm not sure I have a pattern of like, I'm definitely have an expiration date of everything, but I can understand why you would say that. But I mean, I think the answer is no. I didn't have an expiration date. I thought I would, again, when the conditions arose that I felt that I was no longer bringing something and getting something back and an active, vital part of the organization, I would think about doing something else. And that part came. I mean, I had a really great run as a cyber agent. I really enjoyed it. I made what I'm pretty sure it was the first people ever to have been indicted for running a botnet. Pretty sure was my case. It was called CyberSlam, and it was on the front page of the New York Times business section. And it was run by a prosecutor out of the Southern District of California named Arif Ali Khan, who I think is still works for the city of Los Angeles in some kind of capacity as I know he was Department of Homeland Security for a while for LA County and worked for the mayor for a while. So very well regarded guy. I worked with him on that case. It was a multi-jurisdictional, multi-international case. I went to England. I interviewed people in England. I had agents working in Germany doing stuff and working with the BKA, the British National Police. And then all across the country, we had suspects in Louisiana, in Arizona, in Ohio. And, you had a pretty big botnet case, and pioneered, not to toot my own horn, but pioneered some of the techniques that are used. So we basically were able to, see that this botnet was creating a denial of service attack on the victim. The victim was in our jurisdiction. They called. Nobody really knew what to do. And to be honest with you, I got a ton of help, right, from the older agents, and I also got a ton of help from people outside of the bureau. Like I remember talking to cyber luminaries at the time. One of them was named Dave Dietrich, who is a professor at, I think, University of Washington, well-known guy in the cyberspace at the time. I think I even talked to, I don't know if you ever called Gibson, Steve Gibson. He runs a podcast called Security Now. So I think I even talked to him at one point and just said, how do these things work? What does this do? And so really weren't sure how to handle it. Found a computer here in Los Angeles that had been infected with the malware that was being used to do the denial of service. Did a forensic image, which I know you're familiar with, right? Being in the RCFL, forensic image. And this is very beginning of CART, right? Really early on, like 2001, right? This is right after 9/11. It's like 2002.
So for a lot of the guests, we've crossed over and we're starting to talk Greek.
Oh, sorry.
So that's okay.
Yeah.
So let's bring it back a little bit. For those that don't understand, what is a bot and what's a botnet?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sorry about that. So a bot is a computer that has been taken over by a third party, usually a malicious party, right? So when you get a piece of malicious software or a virus on your computer, it can do a bunch of things, but one of the things it can do is basically phone home to the attacker that placed it there, and then basically allows the attacker to do whatever they want with the computer. One of the things that they will do with it, especially in those early days, one of the dumb things that people would do with it was just basically use it for like denial of service. They'd just send a ton of network traffic to every bot they had, and they would be in the numbers of thousands, 10,000, 100,000 computers under the control of a bot operator. They would just send a denial of service attack against a particular website, and just the flood of traffic, especially in those early days in the internet, would just knock the site over and make it unusable. And even then, there were people who were doing e-commerce, and if you did that, you would basically
You're making people lose money.
Of their life, their ability to make money. And so there were significant enough damages to charge the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. So we had a case, and it was just like, how are we going to find out how we're going to do this? Now, what's interesting is it's gotten harder and harder over the years because, the attribution and the ability to chase people down, especially in foreign jurisdictions, has been harder, although getting easier now that the Bureau is making a lot of contacts in those places. But it was a little easier to make the cases then. But long story short, not to drag it out too long, is basically was able to get a computer, forensically image it, take a copy of it, do an analysis with the computer. You're going to have to tell me, I forget what CART stands for. Computer Analysis Response Team is basically, they take a digital copy of the machine that's forensically sound, so it can be proven that it's not, hasn't been tampered with. Look at it, take the malware apart, look at the malware, malicious software, and figured out that it was calling home to a certain place. And
99.9% of the time, that home is in a country that has, let's say, less than robust enforcement capabilities.
Correct. In this case, however, now how much of this story you want to hear?
Personally, I'll listen to it all. So tell me all you want to know. I'm just going to take one step back.
Right,
and so for those who have not worked computer crimes, the easiest way that I would say, an analogy that you can think about is when you boil it back down to the origin, the person in control, imagine if they took control of every car that was on the freeway and they directed every single one of those cars to one off-ramp. And think about the congestion that would be going on at that one off-ramp. And if you were a business at that intersection, you wouldn't be able to operate because no one would be able to get to you. They take all of this army of connected computers, many of them yours and mine, PCs that we don't even know are infected, and they're telling all of these computers, go to this particular website, and all of that traffic completely shuts it down. Did I explain it?
That's an excellent analogy.
Okay.
It's a really great analogy. Well done.
And then
I like that.
You came in and you found one of the infected computers.
Yeah.
Or one of the cars. And you were able to work backwards to where it was getting its signal from.
That's right. That's exactly right. And it turned out, as I said kind of earlier, it was sort of the beginning days. So it wasn't in a foreign country. The controller was in Ohio. and I'm not going to use any of the names of any of the people, obviously, but we knew that the person, one of the people who was involved in it was in England. I flew to England. I worked with, this was really amazing. I worked with the Metropolitan, Scotland Yard Metropolitan Police Computer Crimes Unit, which I think you got my name, right? Didn't you get my name from Steve Santarelli?
Yep.
So I worked with Steve Santarelli and the rest of his gang over there, and the legal attaché in the UK, the FBI representative over there, and we put something together, and I showed them the evidence that we had, and we thought that this particular British citizen was involved in it, and they went out and they did an interview of the guy, and with all the information that we had collected up until then, and they were able to they did a search warrant, they did all the good stuff. They found out he corroborated that, this person in Ohio is the guy who's running the show.
I'm remembering a very famous case with the kid in Europe who was autistic but doing the same thing, and why can't I remember his name? That's not related to this case, is it? Because it went prolonged because we were trying to extradite him back to the U.S. Is he related? And it's killing me that I'm drawing a blank on his name.
Now I can tell you the guy in Germany was a minor, and he's the guy who had written the malware. And there was a whole long drawn out thing about that. I think there was a red notice out for him and all this other stuff. And it was a big deal because he was a minor. And so the German authorities were like,
now's when I wish I was Joe Rogan, had about what happened with that
because that was like the U.S. Attorney's Office and all the legal attachés were dealing with that bit. But I can tell you that the guy who's running the hosting service was on the spectrum. So I basically from England dictated to my partner, Cameron Malin, whose name is on the affidavit as well, the whole story. He typed it up. We went with our prosecutor, got a warrant sworn out, flew to Ohio, worked with another great agent named Robert White, who was in the Columbus office out there. We went, did a search warrant there. Really amazing. His whole garage was servers, and he had uninterruptible power units, and he had, the whole thing was like wired up. It was basically a hosting company in his house. And the allegation was that he knew what was going on. It was actually the ringleader, and wasn't just hosting them, but actually directing and putting people together that were out for malicious ends. And so, I think I can say all this. It's all in the affidavit. It's all in the indictment, and he was indicted. So it was an open court.
Did it end up going to trial?
No, I'm trying to remember how that one was resolved, but
because the reason why I asked that, I couldn't imagine back in 2002, trying to explain to a jury the complexities of what all of this was.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be difficult in 2024.
The affidavit is online. Paradoxically, one of the subjects posted the affidavit and the indictment online. So the entire investigation is researchable, and you can read the whole thing from start to finish. It's kind of funny. And you can see every step. So I won't get into all of it because you could literally read the whole investigation. It's all in there. But long story short is we indicted, I think we filed informations technically on 4 or 5 people in the U.S., the one in Britain, and the one in Germany. And it was very interesting. I learned about that whole underground and how they talked to one another on IRC, and they got together and they said, somebody had, and then also the hitmen, the cyber hitmen were hired by a guy who was a competitor. So we eventually got it all the way back to the person who ordered the hit, if you will, was a guy who was a competitor with the business that he blew offline, and had some bad business dealings. He was trying to buy them or merge with them. They didn't want it. They didn't like the guy. He got pissed off, and then he knew these guys, and he said, I want you to blow these guys off the internet. And they did.
And this is all pre-dark web, correct?
Yes, that's pre-dark web, yeah. But it was like the bulletproof hosting thing. Like all those things still exist. But a lot of the way that you work these cases is still the same. As you go, you find out Now, the other thing I'll mention that was really interesting about this case was it really was actually broken open by a source. If you talk to enough FBI agents or enough cops over time, you'll know that good informants make good cases, right? And so somehow, again, did do it all the way or not, don't do it at all. I mean, I was flying around going to every witness and talking to them personally and looking them in the face. And I started to get a sense for this group of people that was on IRC, and they would have, and so what they would do is they would use these DOS attacks against each other to blow them off IRC. And so I got in that community a little bit, and I found somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. And I eventually worked my way over to a person, and I was like, what is the real name of this guy? And he's like, I actually know this guy's real name. So we were able to get from his nickname on IRC to a real person.
And I'm going to take a quick moment to do some action. So a DOS attack, a denial of service, that goes back to me explaining cars all going off one off ramp. So it's a denial of service, a DOS attack. Yeah. And then IRC was internet relay chat. It was AOL chat rooms before AOL chat rooms.
Slack before there was that. Yeah. Sorry, I'll try to remember.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'm a terrible guest. So long story short was, it was a classic kind of bureau case. It was the technical stuff that we could do with the CART and the Regional Computer Forensics Laboratory and the capabilities that the bureau had developed just right at that time. It was very the beginning of that sort of expertise. The old school bureau develop sources, get somebody who tells you what happened. And that's something interesting to point out as well when we talk about encryption and how encryption hides things. It doesn't hide it from a source. Someone who's in the conspiracy, if they rat you out, you're done, because they are on the endpoint and they're getting all the communications unencrypted, right? So that's the little secret trick that you have, right? If you have a good source, you have a good case. And so we put that together, and we had some of these technical advantages that we had, and we were able to put this case together. So it was very exciting. I really loved it. And the reason why I'm telling you all these details is because it does lead into the next part of the story, which is basically on the heels of that, I went to FBI headquarters to work on a botnet task force, basically, which, so ran out of headquarters. This was after 9/11. So the Bureau had taken to doing these fly teams. Then we had counterterrorism flight teams, and the director at the time was Robert Mueller, and he was a big fan of these flight teams, as I understood. I mean, I never talked to Director Mueller, but that was kind of the direction we were going with these centralized investigations for the big ones coming right out of headquarters and people flying to local field offices to augment and to work cases, especially ones that they thought were globally global conspiracies or broader conspiracies. So I worked on this, what was called the Cyber Action Team Unit, or the CAT unit, and had this botnet task force and worked on all kinds of botnet cases all around the country. So every time there was like a major criminal intrusion, I didn't work on the national security side, but anytime there was a criminal intrusion, and the field office, if it was a smaller field office, maybe they didn't have the CART resources or they didn't have, some of the expertise, they would call our team and we'd fly out there and do a bunch of stuff. Other interesting side notes on that is a lot of this technical support at the time was provided by a division within the research division of the Bureau, and the guy who headed that ended up being the CISO of AWS, of Amazon Web Services. So a lot of really good brains in that group to start with. So did that, and during that period of time, I was working also with Microsoft, because Microsoft did a lot of work in this space too, and Microsoft had a lot of good.
I was going to ask you, being that you were at the forefront, and what I would say for our listeners is, whenever you look at a type of technology that comes in to make our lives easier, make businesses run better, you have to understand they're pushing it out for customer service. They want their customers to benefit from it. They want their business to benefit from it. And they don't necessarily always think first, how can criminals exploit it? Right. And so we're always playing catch up. So my long way around to that was, because you were at the forefront of that, were you finding that the Microsofts and stuff were on board to be helpful on the front end?
100%. I mean, back to this question of botnets and malicious software, Microsoft, right around that same time or a couple of years before, had started what was called the Trustworthy Computing division. And it was headed up by a man named Scott Charney, who was a former federal prosecutor, I think maybe even chief of the computer crime section in DC at DOJ or something. I don't remember exactly Scott's bio, but so he had started that. And Microsoft, as you likely know, was getting hit particularly hard by these viruses like Code Red and NIMDA, and people were primarily targeting Microsoft computers to make into bot computers because Microsoft was the most prevalent operating system, and to be fair, had some easily exploitable weaknesses. And so there was a whole effort at Microsoft to flip the script and be a more trustworthy computing platform. Part of what they did was created this thing called the Digital Crimes Unit, which I believe still exists today. And they hired a bunch of people. They hired in a guy that still a close friend of mine, who had been a federal prosecutor, worked a pretty famous case out of, I think, the Northern District of Virginia, and he was the head of this Digital Crimes Unit. And Steve Santorelli was in the unit. He had come over from the Met CCU to work at this unit. And so I'm talking to those guys on a periodic basis, and they're basically assisting. It's a public-private partnership. They're sharing technologies with us. Oh, here's something that can help you analyze the malicious file. Here's the thing, doing some cross-training. Here's some things that we do in our software that you should look out for if you see this, that kind of thing. And so I had this relationship with them, and I talked to them quite frequently. I had also been working with a guy in Seattle, which is where Microsoft is, Redmond, on some botnet cases, who was closely working with Microsoft people. And so I just got to know them and had all these contacts with them. I think we went and did I remember going and doing a botnet conference with Microsoft. And basically they said, hey, we've got a role that's coming up. Do you know anybody who would be interested? And so back to the theme was I kind of did it, right? I did a big case. I showed that I could do it. I showed that it could be done. I had a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. This seems like a cool new chapter, is maybe to try the private sector. So this is another transition, was is it time to go to the private? And so that one's a little different from the Marine Corps one, where it's I'm going to leave here. I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. This one was more of an opportunity presented itself. And it was just this seems like another one of those things that you really shouldn't pass up. I like my career in the Bureau. I enjoy it. I'm having a great time. I also, by the way, P.S. got to go to 2 Olympics too. I went to the 2004 Athens and the 2006 Torino as a cyber advisor for the U.S. government and for the FBI with the host country police forces. That was amazing experiences. But I was just it just seems like natural thing to try. It's an opportunity that presents itself. I should probably try this. Microsoft it's Microsoft. I should see what this is like to work for Microsoft.
Were you still in DC at the time when you got the offer?
Yes. Yeah.
And did you have to relocate to Seattle? Seattle area?
Yeah, I went to Seattle, yeah.
And so what year was that?
That would have been 2006. So I was in the Bureau about 10 years. Yeah. Just short of 10 years.
That first step off so you'd done Marine Corps time, FBI time. You were fully indoctrinated into the government way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any mentors making that transition into the civilian world and on top of it, the high level corporate civilian world?
That's a great question. And what I was doing was a little bit of a halfway point, because it was staffed by a former federal prosecutor, Steve, who had been there's a guy named Andy Cookson, who unfortunately is no longer with us, who was a forensicator for Met, for Scotland Yard, who worked in that unit. So I was working with a bunch of former cops basically in this unit. So I had a little transition period where they were there. And I'll tell you, I don't know. I mean, I think people make a lot out of this stuff. I mean, I'm a former Marine. I still carry a lot of that stuff with me. But I don't feel like I can't relate to people who have not done those things. I mean, I have a different way of doing some things than some people do because of those experiences. But, I certainly appreciate where they come from and what their cultural and social experiences are and how they approach things. So I never really thought, plus again, I went to a school where I was exposed to lots of different things. So I always felt that I had the ability to kind of shift environment and, take the pulse of who am I with? What do these people care about? What are they? And also your previous, the guy that you interviewed, what's the other agent that you interviewed?
I've had a couple, but Eric Jurgensen.
That was a really good one, by the way. I really appreciated what he said, but he made this point about we learn how to talk to people. That was a great point. Absolutely correct, right? Like that is the job, and getting, understanding people, trying to figure out what makes them tick. Who is this person? What drives them? What are the thing that's going to be leverage? Now, if you look at it in a mercenary way, like what's going to be leverage on this person? But if you look at it in a less mercenary way, it's what will resonate with this person? How can I create a connection with this person? And so I thought between all those experiences, I didn't feel like it was a difficult transition for me to make.
We don't need to hit on every single company because you've now worked for multiple entities. Yeah. Where I would like to kind of an overview umbrella of it is, so how long did you stay with Microsoft?
6 years.
And the opportunities to go to, you've worked for a couple motion picture industries or companies. Yeah. Were those opportunities you went looking for, or did they come to you? And at that 7 years in with Microsoft, were you starting to look for something, or were you kind of content with where you were at?
I'll try to give you the short version of this. So basically, another opportunity arose to work for a consulting firm that was staffed up by former federal prosecutors. It was called Strauss Friedberg. And the guy who had hired me into Microsoft, Scott Stein, was going over to start the office in Seattle. And so that was the opportunity there. And again, it was like, okay, well, this is kind of neat. Like, this is another thing where it was kind of, I had done a bunch of things at Microsoft and I felt good about that. The other thing I should mention is I got out of that digital crimes unit and ended up just being straight up like cyber defense, like running cyber defense programs, like, whatever, cybersecurity program.
So for Microsoft?
For Microsoft, yeah. So when Scott went over and said, hey, there's this opportunity here to help me start this office, that was another thing like, oh, that's an experience that I haven't had. I've done a lot of work here. I've built a decent program here at Microsoft and the team that I built. And I'm pretty proud of them and they seem to be doing well. And this seems to be going well. And I could stay here at Microsoft and maybe try to climb up the ladder here. But then there's this opportunity with people cut from the same cloth as me. And it's basically starting a business. That's something I hadn't done. And I thought, oh, look, I should try that. So I went with him for a while. Honestly, it didn't work out that well. I get along great with Scott, but true to my word from before, the sales thing just never really resonated with me. And part of that job was to get business in. And I just did not like that.
So then when you saw the end of that ride coming,
yeah.
What did you have an idea of where you wanted to end up? What I'm getting at is I want to get to being the consultant on the movie, but as far as the other companies that you went to, did you go looking for them or did they basically recruit you?
I went looking for them. So the movie is critical, right? Because by the end of the time at Strauss Friedberg, this opportunity comes up, and I'll tell you the story. You can cut out whatever isn't interesting, but it's kind of a fun story. I went to, there's a 1-day thing, and a friend of mine called and said, somebody wants a day worth of consulting to tell them about, what it's like to be, do FBI computer crime stuff. And I said, okay. And, I was living in Seattle at the time, but I would come down to LA frequently. I lived LA for 10 years. I always liked it in LA. I live here now again. And so I was like, I'll fly down. I'll do like a day or whatever. Took a day off, went down. I get on the set.
Did you know going in that it was somebody who wanted to consult with you for the purposes of making a movie?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, oh, yes. But I thought it was some kind of half-baked, independent something, whatever. I walk in and...
Who's going to want to make a movie about cybercrime?
Right. And so I'm like, okay. And I'm talking to one of the producers and they're asking me about The Office. Does The Office look right? And I'm like, well, and they're saying, oh, and here's the server room set. Does that look right? I'm like, not really. You kind of got everything backwards. Like I was telling you about the hot aisles. Like, does anybody really care? I'm like, they're not going to care. But yeah, I turn around and there's Michael Mann, incredibly famous film director, right? And turns out he's very interested in getting it right. And he was like, tell me again. And I was like, well, this, should be. And he's like, yeah. And he was like, change this all around. Do what he said. And then, every few minutes, every couple hours, he'd come over and be like, yeah, we're about to do this. Like, does that sound right to you? And I'm like, I don't know. I wouldn't do it that way, probably, And he was, amazingly, like, obviously, he's the artist. He made the final decisions. But he definitely, obviously, was taking input, and I thought that was super cool. And so, long story short, end of the day comes around, producer comes out of the last production meeting and says, he wants you to stay for the rest of the movie. So I said, that was another one of those opportunities, and I quit my job. And
how long did the production of the movie last?
Like 3 months. It's much longer than that, but the part where we were actually in principal photography was like 3-4 months. And that was also interesting. We filmed in Kuala Lumpur, in Hong Kong, in Indonesia. So we went. It was a lot of this locations are in Asia. So we kind of went all around there, and that was an amazing experience. Like I just got to see this genius and it was really cool because I'm just a consultant, right? But he was so interested in making sure that things were right that he literally would make me like I was there. I was 3 feet away from him. And so I watched him direct that movie. The best film school you could possibly have. Now I don't do that, but I was just like watching all of this and his attention to detail and his care for everything that went into the movie. And so I got into that. And then really what happened there was I realized I wanted to go back to LA just because I liked living in LA anyway. And there was a job that came up at Warner Brothers to do cybersecurity for Warner Brothers. So I thought I'll just move back to LA and be around.
And so we don't leave everybody hanging.
Yeah.
This low budget indie film actually was what movie?
Was Blackhat. Was Blackhat, which I think.
And I say that tongue in cheek.
Yeah, I think unfairly. I did not do great at the box office. I think it was a weird time. I think Mike. I'm not going to speak for Mike.
Helmsworth is in it, right?
Chris Hemsworth is the main character in the movie. For a variety of reasons, I don't think it did terribly well at the box office. It was also kind of an interesting experience too, because if you know about the cyber community or the I can't imagine what would happen today. It would be 10 times worse. But I remember at the time, message boards, people being like, who did the consulting on this movie? This guy's an idiot. He doesn't know anything. And I was just like, wow.
But they brought in both sides of the coin because there was actually an actual hacker who was also
that's right
an advisor.
Right.
And I'm sorry, I don't remember his name.
You did your research, right? You watched some of those videos, right, on YouTube. Chris McKinley.
How was it working with him? Did you guys get along pretty well?
Yeah. I thought it was actually kind of interesting to see it from his point of view and my point of view. And it's like, and I think, honestly, my response to that is always, it's not a documentary. It's in service of the story. It's not always going to be perfect the way. So I would say like, that's not really how that's supposed to look. Now, again, I would say to Michael's credit, Mr. Mann, I'll call him. I would say like, actually hackers don't use GUIs. They use a command line. And to his credit, he was like, go ahead, let's use that thing instead. So probably less visual, which
I was going to say Linux is not going to be
which must have
very
really
visual.
burned him up because Michael, and that must have been a tough choice for him because he's his movies have this incredible palette to them, and obviously it's a visual medium, and I think Michael was an artist before, has art in his blood, and kind of. It's a visual medium. So a Linux, a command line screen is not very artistic, right? So it must have really burned him up, but he felt for the sake of, accuracy that we would do that. So that was one of the suggestions that he did take. Now, others he didn't because it wasn't in service of the story, and that's fine. But that was kind of interesting because, there's this sort of flare up around that, minor, about that in the community, and it was like, yeah, guys, it's not meant to be perfect. We're telling a story to people who don't even know the difference between these things. Like, it matters to you, but that's like 1% of the population that's going to care about that thing that you think we got wrong. So,
right. Did that offer you any opportunities to do any more consulting as far as movies?
Yeah, I worked on Jason Bourne as well. The movie just called Jason Bourne, which was Paul Greengrass. I think he directed multiple of the Jason Bourne movies. It was the last one he did. So that was one where there was, I worked on that one and did a little script consulting on that one for him. That was fun too. Yeah. So, but anyway, I had an interest. I thought the industry was fun. I really enjoyed the heck out of making that movie. I thought it was so much fun, and I liked Los Angeles anyway, and I wanted to move back to SoCal. So I was like, I'm going to go back to SoCal. And so really the place, obviously the major industry or one of the major industries is the studios. So I, as you noted, without getting into each one, I kind of worked at 3 of the major studios, Warner, NBCU, and Disney, in their cybersecurity teams. I worked for Lucasfilm for a little while and in the movie industry, it's mostly around content protection, they call it,
copyright.
Yeah, copyright, intellectual property. And content protection, right? Is making sure, and you've heard over the years of every once in a while there's a film that leaks. They've done a much better job of it lately, and the whole ecosystem is kind of, improved over time because it's an extremely challenging problem because you've got it's a very distributed ecosystem and there's a lot of independent contractors. So you can imagine, perfect example, they're going to do the score of a movie. Well, the guy who scores the movie needs to see the movie. And oftentimes they work out of their home studio. So you're taking the Star Wars movie that nobody's seen yet, that's super secret, that they don't want to have leak, and you're giving it to some guy in his house somewhere to look at it. So there's a tremendous amount of flexibility and creativity you have to go through to try to protect these things when they're being shared. Another interesting side note to that is, they make the toys. They have to have the models a year ahead. So you're giving them drawings, schematics of characters I remember there was Kylo Ren, was the main character of the new franchise that J.J. Abrams helmed. And also, obviously, Rian Johnson did the middle one. But they had the Kylo Ren plans. I forget which company does it to make the toys, ahead of time. So you've got this stuff spread out, all this intellectual property spread out all over the place with all these licensees and the PR and the marketing. They have to make the posters 6 months in advance. They're doing all this stuff, or they're designing them 6 months in advance. So you've got this stuff everywhere. Especially in this town, right? It's everywhere. And you have to protect all of it. So it's a really interesting set of security challenges in the intellectual property space. So I've had that experience for a while now.
And I could see it being a very subtle balance, but from the flip side, that music producer, okay, fine, he might leak that one movie. He's never going to work again, or she's never going to work again in Hollywood. So it's what do you want to give for what you're going to get, so to speak?
True. So yeah, you think about the one individual, that's kind of an easy one, right? You're right. They're not going to do that. That's more like they'd get attacked, or the cleaning person, or a friend who's around who knows that they do this stuff and is a real, isn't someone that they should trust. We've seen things like that. If you go to some of the bigger, small office type situations, there's someone who's not working on the movie but is 3 desks down and knows you're working on the movie and thinks that they can lift something without anybody knowing it's them. and so there's the whole digital rights management, encryption, watermarking, all of those techniques and technologies come from, I don't know if they come from that industry, but heavily utilized in that industry. So I did that for a number of years, and that was fun.
And we've already hit on this, is that you've always been a person who's open to new opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
From the purpose of the podcast, though, and for somebody who's sitting today thinking like, all right, I'm in my career, whether it's military or first responder, and I want to make that jump into the private sector, and not necessarily along, cyber realm, but it's still going to be, it's going to be the same. From your perspective, when you've made these jumps from company to company, what does somebody need to know about, in the sense that, are you actively always kind of putting feelers out for the next opportunity, or is it just, for no other term, you're just kind of lucky that opportunities fall your way?
Gosh, I want to answer that question thoroughly and carefully. I mean, I think I keep coming back to the same thing, which is I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to do the absolute best job I can for whoever it is that I'm working with. I honestly am not out there looking for the next thing. I guess I'll come back to this, like, conditions that arise and things are great and they work. And I think for anybody, and I give this advice to some of the younger people that I work with, even people that work for me, because I care about them. I want them to have the best life that they can have. It's not about what I can do for the company, which sounds crazy, but it's true, is you have your time here with me. We work together. Every time you make a move, it's a little push and it's a little pull. It's a little, I've done what I needed to do here. And I think I've hit the end of the road. I've given them everything. And in every place I've been, I will stand up for this. I've always left. I mean, it's for other people to decide, but I feel that I've always left them in better shape than I found them. So in all of my situations that I've gone into, I came in, I built a program that probably is still serving them well, I hope. And I know this because I get feedback from people who join those places afterwards, and I meet them in places and they're like, oh, you're Michael Panico. I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh, I heard so much about you. You used to be here. I work here now. I'm like, oh, yeah. Right. And they're like, yeah. So I feel like I've definitely given them my heart and soul when I was there. I've done something. I've given them something that's serviceable when I leave. And then something comes up and I go, it sounds pretty corny. It's not like, it's like, whatever, like, I'm needed elsewhere, but it's kind of like,
my mission here is done.
Something else comes up and I'm like, that's interesting. That would be something I haven't done that I want to try. And it's something to stretch me a little bit. I can take what I've learned up until now and it will help these guys. And then I'll learn something that I haven't learned. And that's pretty much the story. I'm not really out there always looking for the next best thing. I'm just kind of build my skill. I mean, and so I guess the advice to the audience is, make the most of, even if you hate where you are, make the most of where you are at, right? Is like, learn everything that you can. Just think of everything as being like, what's the experience here? What's the thing that I can derive value from in this situation, right? Even terrible situations, right? Like, you can be like, I can learn how not to treat my employees if I ever run my own businesses. Don't do this, or, whatever it is, right? Technical skill, or the people that you meet. I mean, I can't say enough about that. I mean, I have to tell you, again, I don't want to make this sound like I'm patting myself on the back, but I mean, given your all, the people who recognize that and other people who give their all are the people you want to know going forward into the future. That's your network, right? So I've resonated. I'll go to a place. The people who are phoning it in, who are there to get a paycheck or don't care, I don't have a lot of truck with them. The people who are there to do something, and especially the nice thing about cybersecurity is that is not unlike the military or that's a calling, right? Like, people put their all into that. You have to study. You have to be on top of your game. There's always something new. If you are just like collecting the paycheck, you are not going to be a good cybersecurity practitioner. So what happens is, as you go through your life, like, you're collecting people and relationships along this way, and they know, oh, this is a guy, and I feel very proud of it. That's probably the most pride that I have is about, I know that there are people along my whole past who go, I know that guy. I know what I'm going to get from that guy. If I need help with this, I'm going to call him because I know I'm going to get 110%. He's going to give me a good answer about the thing. And if he tells me he's going to do something, he's going to give it to me. Right. And I think and vice versa. Right. The people that I keep in contact with are also that way. And so you build that network. You're a solid guy. They know you're a solid guy. And so that's probably, I guess, does that kind of tie it out for you? Like, it's like you're no matter where you go, there you are, and you bring your best to it, and you get a reputation for bringing your best, and you collect a network over time, and that's probably the best thing you could do.
Well, and the thing that jumps out to me that you said, the first and most important is always come in looking to do the best job you can.
Yeah.
Because you're building your reputation as much as you're building your skill set.
100%.
The other thing is that if you do good work and you build a good reputation for yourself, that will stay after you've gone.
Yes.
But the other thing that you didn't mention, and I'm not saying you left it out, is that in corporate America, that movement is not looked at negatively. It's actually kind of the norm, or is it not, where people are always kind of, I'll call it in flux.
Yeah, I've heard both things. I think there's a sweet spot, and it's interesting. I've recently kind of heard a little pushback on this, like jumping too frequently, but I don't know how I feel about that. I guess I'll just be opinionated and say what I want to say, which is like,
it hasn't had a negative impact on you to this point.
Not really. I don't think it has. It's possible that people have looked at my resume and been like, he's bounced around too much, and they've passed on me for things, and that's fine. Like I said, I don't really go out and apply too much to stuff. So I don't know how often that happens. In general, when I apply for something, I get an interview. But I also think, again, not to get, in corporate America, they don't have any loyalty to you. If they have budget cuts, they're going to riff you.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't generally, again, happen to people in cybersecurity because it's a needed field. And it also doesn't generally happen to people who bring 110% every day, right? But at the end of the day, you're still just a number on a sheet. And no matter what businesses say, and some are better than others about making you feel like you're a part of a family, but for the most part, especially big companies, you're a number on a sheet. So it's fine for recruiters to say, well, they like to see that you've stayed a long time at a company. But the truth is, I think it is a little bit more, as you said, it's a little bit more of a free agent market, right? I try to hit the sweet spot, basically. It's like I said, like I would look askance at someone who says, oh, I've been the cybersecurity officer for a year. Now, it's possible that just the situation's untenable, okay, but if you're doing that all the time, I feel like you're probably trying to escape your poor decisions at each place and not be, not get handed the hot potato when it comes to you. It takes a good...
You're looking to get out in lieu of...
It takes a good 2.5, 3 years to really put a cybersecurity program together, to build a good program, to attract and train the talent, to build the policies, procedures, and technical controls. So if you're doing less than that, that's probably not great. But there's a sweet spot. Again, you do something, and then there's a natural place where it's like whatever the friction of the company, you can only take it so far. You run out of funds. There's a new boss that comes in who doesn't want to put as much focus on cybersecurity. And I don't mean like, whatever, like a business lead who thinks cybersecurity is not so important, or for whatever reason, the business changes a little bit. Like that happened to me, at Disney. I worked in the broadcast, the ABC. And what happened was just a sea change because they went over to streaming. And they already had, and so they hired a bunch of outside people to do the streaming stuff. And those people already had security people that they worked with. So it was like, I saw the writing on the wall there, and I was like, I'm probably not going to get the, that's the future, the streaming thing, and I'm probably not going to get that gig. So it's time for me to go, right? It's like there's factors that arise, there's conditions that arise that should tell you maybe now it's time to move on. And hopefully, again, you've built up, some goodwill. You're known as a person who gets things done, and they're sorry to see you go, but they understand why, and so it's so much about, and as a final word for me, I don't know, we can keep talking as long as you want, but I would say, it's all about how you comport yourself. And I think one of the things that we learned in the military, and hopefully we'll learn in the police, is, we learn how to comport ourselves, right? And, have that bearing. That's not to say that I haven't lost my temper over the years or said something stupid that I regret. But I mean, in general, like I said, you bring your A game, you treat people respectfully, you know how to talk to people, you carry yourself well. Those skills, and especially for your audience, right? Those are, I'll actually say this to close, is the very best thing that I have is probably, and I don't know whether this is partly just my own persona or whether I also learned this from the Marines. It's part wrestling, it's part Marines, but it's just that bit about getting stuff done, getting it done. It's amazing. There's a lot of smart people out there who cannot get stuff done. But if I can take the most junior person. If they're one of those, I will figure out how to get it done. You can do anything with that person. You could do anything with that person. If they could be the smartest person in the world or the slickest person in the world, the best personality and most charm. But if they're not, someone's going to put their nose to the grindstone and figure out how to get it done, get it over the finish line. It doesn't really matter. They're eventually going to falter.
To start wrapping this up, I'm gonna give you the opportunity to paint with a very broad brush. Somebody's listening today.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they don't already have their foot in the cyber door. But it's something that's kind of rattling around in the back of their head that they're interested in. If you were advising somebody today who's just coming into cybersecurity, what would you recommend?
Thank you for the question. I think, so first of all, this is back to the point I was just kind of making, which is about just the go for it attitude and the just make it happen kind of attitude. Is there's so many resources for free on YouTube and on and then there's things that you pay that aren't very expensive, like the Udemy's and the free code camp, and there's all kinds of resources out there. So there's no excuse. You don't need a degree. So that I'll say that first of all, right? It's really important. There's a lot of educational opportunities out there that you can take advantage of so that you can learn. I would say start with the basics, the real down in the weeds basics. If you can learn how networking works, how computers actually work, a great course is CS50. It's actually a harvard.edu class, CS50, CS050. I think you look it up on YouTube, and the whole class is there for free. It's a Harvard class for free on computer science. And it gets all into the weeds about how computers work. And then you eventually learn how to do the networking stuff. And then if you know how to write some code and how code works, and then you learn how data works, like SQL, if you learn how to do SQL queries, get some of the basics under your belt, because no matter what you do, it always comes back to those things. You're going to be able to have a foundation. And then if you're a can-do-it kind of a person, and you start off as a junior analyst somewhere, and I can tell you, if it's like, oh, we got to analyze, this is a gigabyte worth of logs, and you throw your hand up and you just started, but you're like, I know SQL, I can throw it into a SQL table and do the query and get you an answer in 10 minutes. Guess what? You're on your way. I'm going to give it to you. So learn the basics, take advantage of the free stuff, and get out there and just learn the basic stuff. And don't, eventually as you get a little more mature, you can start taking some of the more sophisticated courses. There's capture the flag exercises. You can try your hacking skills. You can try some of your blue team skills. There's so many amazing things out there, resources that are out there that you could use.
I appreciate it. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
It was a good conversation.
Good. I hope so.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.